My name is Rhett Power. I run a company called Accountability Inc., which is a leadership consulting firm. But I also, in my capacity here today, I'm here as with Forbes and Rolling Stone, and I am here to introduce and let these fine people share their wisdom with us. I'm just going to ask the questions. We're going to be talking about this afternoon enhancing the EU's competitiveness, inclusive economic growth, innovation, and collaboration between public and private sectors. Now, I am going to surprise you with a question, and of course, leave it up to a Forbes journalist to do that. And I'm going to start off with it. You can answer it or not answer it. It's okay. I was at another panel the other night, and the person said, economically, the EU is irrelevant. What is your take? And do you agree or disagree?
All right, I'll start. First of all, let me just introduce myself briefly. I'm Jean-Christophe Laloux. I'm the Director General in charge of lending inside the European Investment Bank. And for those who don't know, the European Investment Bank, we're the bank of the EU. My teams do 67 odd billion euro of lending every year. Okay, so that's already not kind of irrelevant, I would say.
I would say not.
Now,
I didn't say I agreed with it, but
I completely disagree with that statement. I think, honestly, we're still the first market in terms of number of consumers. The market is not perfectly integrated, this is true, but we're still a market with wealth, with a lot of potential. What is true is that currently, in the investment decisions of investors, Europe tends to be behind in terms of attention span. And it is true, let's not kid ourselves, that most investors out there, including European investors at the moment, are turning east or west of Europe to direct their investment decisions. That is true. Whether for that much Europe is irrelevant from an economic point of view, I wouldn't go that far. So it's really, I mean, this is the subject of the panel today, is how do we regain in competitiveness and in attractiveness? Not in relevance, but in attractiveness. That's how I would put it.
I love that. Great answer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cyntia Ortiz Toledo. I head Public and Regulatory Affairs at Coca-Cola HBC, Coca-Cola Hellenic Bottling Company, and I'm very happy to be here with you. Maybe just to respond to your question as well, I agree with you fully. I don't think Europe is irrelevant. I think we are still, and we will be even more relevant if we make a couple of adjustments that make the European companies in particular more competitive. And I think it's part of the topics that we will be discussing today of how can we make that happen. But yes, there are things, the world is huge, the dynamics are even increasingly speeding up. So we just need to remain open, flexible, adaptable to make this happen. But I think we are, and we should remain as relevant as we should, yes.
The next few years will certainly be interesting for sure.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the invitation first to Irina and to the Davos Lodge. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Stephan Pouyat. I'm the chairman of Green Powerhouse. I spent actually 20 years in a company called Euroclear with 40 trillions of assets, so a little bit bigger than EIB. But I think the question that has been asked is quite relevant. I think 20 years ago, this question would have never even hit the road. And I think there is a more fundamental, subtle, maybe underpinning reasoning behind this sentence. I would say that we have lost significant competitiveness in Europe. And if we don't react, there is a chance that we might become much more irrelevant than we still are. So we are still in a good shape. Yes. But I would not say that the slope is going in the right direction. And I think that you know, the US president's announcements that just kicked in shows that even if they only have 250 million, they have been much more on the upside than we are with 450. So we are losing a significant amount of our own energy in Europe. And I am French, I'm pro-European, but I feel that we are not taking necessarily every time the right decision. So I know it's the topic of the panel, but
Let me ask you a follow-up question to that, and we are going to get to your questions, I promise. Based on what you just said, in the inaugural speech, he didn't mention Europe. What do you think? I mean, that's
okay.
It's important.
Sure, but he's a very smart political guru, right? So I think that there is a lot to be said. Europe doesn't have one voice, as much as we like to say. If we just take energy, hydrogens and the like, how much fight that we have inside our border? I mean, as I said, we have to try to be slightly more pragmatic and create that 450 million market capacity that we have and scale up.
And I agree to that. I think we shouldn't forget indeed that President Trump is, as far as I know at least, not really in favor of multilateralism.
No.
And rather in favor of bilateralism. And in that respect, he wouldn't give publicity to Europe, which represents some
Fair
kind of
enough.
a federation. And
Yeah.
I think it's indeed fair enough to say that from that perspective, he would rather take a talk about individual member states, which indeed compared to the sizes of China or the importance of his neighbors are less relevant in an inaugural speech.
Right.
I think that's what there is to see to it.
I think that's a good way to read that, by the way.
I agree with many of the points raised. I still think that despite not being explicitly mentioned, and we can give a lot of context to that, of course, Europe, in response to that, have extended the hand of friendship and collaboration. And I think if Europe drives these initiatives properly and they start, becoming really good partners as well at the same level of language that is the dynamics of the world are having, we can have a bigger space. So, okay, we were not maybe explicitly mentioned there, but that doesn't mean that the importance of the EU is still quite relevant.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me pass the first question here. Given the EU's sort of ambitious climate and sustainability goals under the Green Deal, how does European Investment Bank balance its role driving green innovation while addressing urgent need to reduce regulatory and financial burdens?
So first of all, there is no balancing act to be done between the two things.
Okay.
And the first thing to say is that we are, as the Bank of the EU, absolutely committed to the green transition. We remain committed, and I know that there is a bit of skepticism around, and there are a number of financial institutions that have announced that they were leaving whatever association that they had formed around it. We're going to keep on faring the course, and probably this could also be the source of future competitive advantage. I think the fact that the United States in particular revert back to oil and is not going to change the course of the overall evolution. I think overall, I think at least, that the green transition will happen. Just a matter of time.
Right.
So if the states want to pause for 4 years, good. Let's go ahead, because maybe for once we can get ahead of things and not behind things, right? So that's one thing. So concretely, this year we have financed in the EIB nearly 30% of everything we have done on energy and renewable energy production. So 30 billion euros of new financing, and we are full throttle on energy transition, and we're going to continue to do that. That's the main thing. And what we are also trying to do a lot is to do more on risk-taking on Cleantech. Cleantech is one of the areas where Europe still has the lead. When you look into the number of patents that are filed on the various economic sectors, Cleantech is the one where Europe has got the lead, together with life sciences, probably are the two sectors, and advanced materials maybe, where we still are clearly in the world lead. And we are providing equity-type finance to Cleantech companies in Europe. Now, we are allowing them to go from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million euros equity. The clear challenge is coming for afterwards for the scaling up phase. So that's on the investment side, on the green transition. So we fire on all cylinders. We mobilize our balance sheet as much as we can to actually finance those climate action positive investments. On the regulatory side, now we are not a policy-making body. We are just a bank, and it's already not bad. But what we're trying to do is actually to talk to our colleagues and friends from the European Commission to tell them, hey, why don't you think about this, or why don't you think about that? Now, there are two themes that are very close to my heart and I would like to mention. One is the scale up. We do not have very large pockets, deep pockets equity investors in Europe, and that is a problem for our European companies that are trying to grow beyond Series B and C, in particular the innovative companies, because they are either sold to East or Western Europe, or they're floating themselves on the NASDAQ. I mean, honestly, that is an area where Europe needs to do something, and we need to take initiative, the capital market unions and the others.
What would that look like?
Well, I think for a start, let's face it, we're not going to get the same type of capital markets in the EU in a click like this.
Right.
We have a very fragmented landscape. We have 27 different member states that are all fighting to have their own little thing. Now, I really hope that part of the solution will come from the political level. But in the meantime, and being who we are, and with the importance of the banking sector that we are, we should try to develop a large-scale equity initiative that could actually invest in these companies and accompany them throughout the whole life cycle of investment, not only for seed and early-stage investment. That's one. The second thing we're trying to tell them is, and that is also a difficulty, but this is my personal credo, we are fine on regulation, very fine, very, very fine. Now maybe has come the time to use the carrot rather than the stick, right?
Yep.
Use incentives. Try to position a number of initiatives that actually lead people to actually do more of it or to invest more, rather than, and that's fine, regulation must be there. It's really important. And when you see on AI, for example, we came with the AI Act, and fine, it's going to serve also as a reference point for other parts of the world.
Right.
But now is the time, if we want to accelerate and to bridge the competitiveness gap that we have, that we learn how to use the carrot, not always the stick.
Yeah, I mean, business is tough enough, right? You don't need two hands tied behind your back to try to scale and grow today.
No, that's correct, and I think we are probably at the at the highest end of the tolerance of businesses, from what I hear also from my counterparts in terms of administrative burden and burden of regulations and permitting and so on. So the Commission, for example, says for green energy, and they are saying the right thing, they're doing the right thing. We're going to speed up the permitting. We're going to make sure that, there are a number of zones that are predefined so that permitting can happen twice faster. Good, let's do it. And that also means convincing a number of member states to implement these regulations into their national laws and to actually go ahead with it on the ground. So that's really where our attention should be razor sharp and focused on in the coming years.
Cyntia, talk a little bit about, many European businesses argue that over-regulation stifles, along the same line, right, stifles innovation. From your experience in public and regulatory affairs, what practical steps can be taken to strike the right balance between innovation and maintaining strict compliance with EU standards?
I mean, look, also taking from what you just said about the regulation part. So I think there is an element where we need to be very clear about, it's not about making more regulation or less regulation, it's about making the right regulation and how to make the right regulations. So there are different mechanisms, and from a time when I was working at OECD, I was looking a lot into what are the techniques that you need to do to actually produce proper regulation. So one element for that, it is about consultations, but real consultations, not just ticking the box exercise of I consulted, something that really creates a notion of the impact that the regulation will have, not only from just is it feasible to implement, is it feasible to do it? And we have seen some examples that is not necessarily the case. Recently, with the EU deforestation regulation, we saw there was a lot of outcry from different industries, from either countries, even international organizations, the WTO, saying like, okay, we agree with the principles of it, but how are we going to implement that? So luckily afterwards, the Commission, the Parliament, they made the decision of delaying implementation, which is great. But if we go one step before, if we participate and we consult for the industries, the different groups, the different voices that have to be taken into account, we can make a regulation that when it's going to take a force, it could be easily implemented. So in that sense, I believe that to be able to create and foster innovation, you also need to foster competitiveness. And the way to do that is really creating an environment that is the way of doing business. And when you were commenting as well about the different perspectives now from the US, for example, we see this very important trend of looking into making the life of business easier, to make them more competitive. So when we start looking in a partnership way from the public and private sector, that they can collaborate very, very well together because the ambitions are more or less the same. So talking about climate sustainability, we have the same ambitions. The only thing is how we are going to get there is through collaboration, and a lot of that is consultation, discussions, openness to consider. And if we start doing that and embracing that process more systematically, we can do that. In Europe, also coming back to the comments of why it's difficult also for European companies to adhere more into a competitive agenda, it is because of all the regulations we have at different levels. So you have the member states regulating, you have the EU regulating, so you have quite a complexity here that if it's well coordinated between member states, as you were also mentioning, the same ambitions, also inter-European Commission as well, different commissions looking really into a coherent approach, I think we can start moving the needle. And I think the Commission is asking themselves the right questions now about how to enhance competitiveness even more.
Thank you. Stephan, you're an advocate for green energy, right? What, I lost my question. The moderator's not supposed to say that, are they? But I wanted to make sure we got the good questions for these guys. So you're an advocate for green energy. What barriers do you see fostering innovation and scaling green initiatives across Europe? And how can public and private sectors collaborate more effectively to overcome these barriers without compromising Europe's competitiveness?
So first of all, I want to applaud EIB for the excellent work they are doing, and the very long and strong collaboration with Euroclear as a whole. And we need more of this mindset. We need more of those leaders, for sure. I wish more would be done, taking the example of a role model like EIB. Now, I'm a very, very pragmatic guy. I've been running this company, all the business side of this company for 20 years, as I told you. And I am a little bit surprised sometimes how we are slightly too technocrat in Europe. And I'm not saying that the ideas are wrong, but it's the framing and the implementation that kills it. As a French, we used to have these so extremely smart engineering capabilities. We were ahead of our French competitors, European countries, and we're very proud of that, right? But when it comes to marketing and pragmatic implementation, I don't know if it's in the gene of Europe as a whole at 27, but it has not improved. It's 1 of 27. But I will give you just one very pragmatic example that is staggering. And it shows how sometimes simple pragmatisms make such a big difference. I would not name the country, but I will name the sector. If you want to get serious in the green energy transition, this is massive capital intensive, day one. And you have to hold your investment for 12 years, if not 15 years, to see a return. I don't know any normal people who would do that, especially not VCs and, business angels and all of that, right? So it has to be a public-private partnership type of mentality. So what they did, you take the most wealthy people, you don't need to be super intelligent. You just look at the whole scheme and say, who has a lot of money in town? and you said, hey, energy sector. The guys who runs the oil and gas, they have a pretty good balance sheet. They have improved their balance sheet by 40%. Thanks to the Ukrainian war, they have more cash than you can think of to try to understand what green energy can mean to them. So they have applied green hydrogen plan to actually test the decarbonizations of their own refinery on oil. How dare you? You invest in refinery oil decarbonization, but this is bad industry. Are you helping this industry? But are we also naive? This industry is going to stay along for the next 30 years. So these guys, they are very smart. They use it as a back office playground. So it's their own land, it's their own industry, it's their own capital, and they play and they make massive improvement. Whilst in Europe, we are still trying to figure out how to, roll out this type of energy. And that's a very pragmatic example, but they will actually transit much faster knowing that they are the oil producer of today, just as an example.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. That's worth a panel on its own. Jean, talk about, and we're going to have to get into quick answers here because I do want to cover, we have another round here, and then I have a couple more questions. So I'm going to go over time just to let you know. With increasing geopolitical tensions, such as U.S. withdrawing global sustainability agreements like the Paris Accord, how can Europe ensure that its businesses remain globally competitive while adhering to strict climate regulations? And what role should public-private partnerships play in that context?
Well, I agree with you that, in particular for the green transition, that public-private partnership are really important because of the capex nature of the business, and therefore you cannot entirely rely. Even though there are some pure private partnership forms to be formed to that, there are some equity investors, but most important will be to give visibility actually to investors, and for that you need a very stable public sector actually giving the way and giving certainty on demand coming, which is really important at this point of time. That's also one way of public partnership, and then you have of course a financial seed that has to be put by the public. Look, on the question of competitiveness, I think frankly there are many things to say, and we all know, energy prices are higher in Europe. We are less productive also than elsewhere in the world, so we need to improve on both things. I think bottom line, everything will depend on our ability to do two things. I think first, to improve on our productivity by embracing and by accelerating, embracing new technologies. There will be no salvation for Europe except for innovation and embracing of innovation. Let's face it, with the demographics that we have, with the standard of living that we have, with the unit cost of labor that we have, that's the only way to go. So we need to absolutely accelerate on our ability to not only to bring about new innovative companies, but also to bring in innovation into existing companies. Fascinating how to see the different dynamics between the States and Europe, for example. If you look at the top 5 market caps of the NASDAQ, none of them existed 20 years ago or 25 years ago. You look across the Atlantic and all companies existing 100 years ago. So I mean, it really says something about the fact that in Europe we have this difficulty in embracing new technology, in creating new things, or at least having the existing companies, since we're not able to create new ones, embracing new technologies. That's one. And the second one, I think, is the green transition. I'm sorry to hammer the point, but we are too dependent on a number of external factors and on the import of fossil fuel inside of Europe. We've seen whatever consequence it has had. 74, the first oil shock, that was also for the United States. But for now, we are really heavily still much more dependent on the import of fossil fuel than other parts of the world and our competitors. So we have to there also double up and with doing so, we will produce cheaper energy. And with the cheaper energy, we will partly bridge our competitiveness gap towards the others. So these are, to me, the two areas on which focus needs to go in the coming years.
Cyntia, so you're talking about, we were talking before we came out of here about how the EU needs to focus on reinforcing competitiveness. Talk a little bit about that, and from your experience and policy, what can be done?
Yes. I want to follow up a little bit on Jean-Christophe, what you were mentioning about the green transition and the Green Deal, the climate ambitions that we have. I think to enhance competitiveness, I mean, Europe has set very ambitious targets, very good values, very good ideas of where we need to go. That's excellent. The part that we need to focus now, and quite in accelerated manner, is about how to foster competitiveness. I mean, energy obviously is one of the key principles that we need to do. Ease of doing business is something else that we need to do. But another thing is also to really try to bond these two together. For example, sustainability ambitions and competitiveness, they go hand in hand. And it's not just a theoretical approach or a nice thing to say, it can happen. And one of the things that makes me so proud about Coca-Cola Hellenic Bottling Company is that we do that completely. So sustainability is part of our business model. It's completely enhanced in what we do. And we are more competitive, and we are more, because we have sustainability as part of the business model. So one of the elements, for example, talking about decarbonization, so we set up our net zero targets for 2040, and we have worked everything around to make it happen. The reality is it can make us a better company and more competitive. So when you merge those two, you can actually have better results, not only for the world, but also for the private sector. Now, the complexity here is, how can we collaborate together in the different multi-stakeholder areas to actually make that happen? And the changes that need to be taken cannot be done in isolation by private companies. I mean, we can make our efforts, we can play our part, we can keep investing. For example, we have done more than 50 million euros in the last few years in in-house recycling facilities. We can do a lot, and we will keep doing that. But we need an environment that facilitates this happening. And the way to do that is, of course, with very good focus improvements on the areas that can deliver the most. But the principle itself, I think they're both very competitive. And I like a lot what you were saying about that we still have some elements that we can leverage even more in terms of sustainability ambitions, for example, and just try to drive it to our competitive advantage as Europe, for example.
You set up the next question perfectly for Stephan. I'm going to give you the hard one. I don't know about Europe, but when you start talking about technology and competitiveness with our politicians in the U.S., the eyes roll back in the back of the head. And I feel like, I mean, if you ever look at any of our congressional hearings when we're talking about technology, it's comical. How do we get regulators to understand the pace and the speed which we need to be competitive? I mean, as business leaders, we have to move with pace and speed. How do we get our regulators to understand that and to see? I mean, as a CEO myself, I have to see around corners. I have to be able to look at what's happening in the future to be relevant. I mean, you look at the Fortune 500 today, you used to stay on the Fortune 500 75 years. I think it's down to 10 or 11 years, the average life of a business on the Fortune 500. How do we get our governments and our politicians to see that we've got to move faster?
Well, it's first of all, in the financial field, it's probably the most conservative field ever. So if you want to really try to create innovation in that field, I would say it's tough cookie. But if you put that, by the way, you've seen all these sandbox and everything. I mean,
Right.
it's been there for like 15 years and very little come out of it at scale. Okay, so Euroclear, as I said, clear 3 trillions a day, 900 trillions a year. It's 10 times the world GDP that clears every year in this ecosystem. So very little new innovation technology can get inside this ecosystem. Nonetheless, it's not catered for the global south, and that's why Green Powerhouse has been built, just to actually transit this energy capital from the north to the south, just to accelerate that. But risk profile, all those things, very difficult. But to come back to your point, any entrepreneur needs to create values that doesn't exist today. So by design, you push the boundaries to create the value that yesterday was not there. Right? So it's a natural thing. And I think that it's normal that the regulators bounce back and forth, right? The only thing that I would wish the regulators would be more mindful of is to protect people from naive understanding, okay? The naivety whereby you have entrepreneurs that try to actually rip off the retirements of those poor people that think that overnight they can become more wealthy, not rich, but whatever. And in the financial sector, I mean, the crypto stuff, I would want to really intervene in protecting those people. But also, it's the same with the. I'm going into a different field that I'm not super familiar with, but I am as a consumer, which is those social media, where you see all this manipulation. And so freedom of internet was created in Geneva, in the CERN and all that, so all good news. But if people take that and try to harm the planet, we should be superior to that. I am not against technology. I am against regulatory naivety to not being able to protect the mass that is easily manipulated.
Fair point. Thank you. All right, let's give you guys a closing word. Maybe 30 seconds to a minute on your final thought. And I want you to say, are you positive about the next 4 years or skeptical of the next 4 years?
I'm a born optimist.
Good.
It's an easy way to actually evacuate the problem. You say I'm always positive.
And I'm like you. So,
honestly, I mean, come on. We have to be optimistic and we have to be going. We have so many good things going, especially for us Europeans, and competitiveness can be regained. You know, we should never forget where we're coming from. We still have the best brains. We still have the best universities. We still have, the best social welfare system. We have also the best energy grid, even though it's not perfect and it needs to be broad.
Right.
We have a lot of the best things.
Good, great infrastructure.
So let's go for it. And I'm really optimistic that, as in previous occasions, when the crisis hits and when people come to realize indeed something needs to be done, then we will pull our acts together. We will close the gaps, close the ranks, and we will go for it. So yes, I'm optimistic.
Well, I'm writing a book on self-talk, and I love that. I love that eternal optimist. I think that you'd make a great leader.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm an optimistic person too, and I believe that we can be optimistic because we are having a self-reflection time here as well. I think Europe is asking themselves the right questions now, and it's self-reflecting of the things that have gone well, the things that can be improved, and they are asking the right questions about what can we do tangibly better and make it happen. So I think that's one. The second is becoming more adaptable and quicker to make decisions, to what you were also mentioning. If we can increase the speed of not only asking the right questions, but also taking the right decisions at the necessary speed, I think we can also regain a lot of competitiveness and foster it even further.
Yeah, I like that point because I do think we're at an inflection point, right? We are at a major technological inflection point.
We are.
And I think that's really good.
Well, I would say I'm a realistic optimistic. What do I mean? I mean that there is still a little bit of a risk that in Europe we over-engineer our bureaucracy, and that we have on the other side some political wave, distraction, and the like. So I really hope that Europe can understand, thanks to Trump, because let's not fool ourselves. Trump is kicking us in the right direction to react and to stop being complacent. And Europe has to realize that if they don't act, in the capital market, there are very big flows. Everybody knows about that across 27 countries. The tax collection and all. This is une usine à gaz, as we call it in France, right? And as long as we don't fix it, the budget will always be chaotic, and everybody will try to keep it on their side, very, very opaque type of things, and then we get some, some bump in the road down the road. So I hope that we are not going to go backward, but we are going to really seize this opportunity of this green disengagement that actually is an opportunity for Europe, as well as the ability to have those 27 countries to finally come together. So it has been a little bit of a long journey to come down to that, and some crises sometimes help. So I don't want any crisis in 4 years' time. I just want people to be wise, smart, and take the right decision. That will be my closing date.
Well, on that note, let's give these wise leaders a round of applause. And thank you for joining us here at Davos Lodge. We'll be back in just a second.